I was concerned about the competition that was coming along from major companies like IBM, General Electric, Westinghouse. And I thought there was a very well-known case called the Firestone Company in Akron. The trustees there, this was 30 years old at this time, kept all of the money in the Firestone stock. And at the end of this 30 or 40 years or whatever the hell it was a disaster. So that had some influence on what I was doing. And I worked out the numbers. You see, Peg used to get about $3 million a year in dividends, and the other people proportionately. Well, I said to myself, if Peg gets $400 million, which would be her share of $1.6 million, she doesn't have to invest very much money to get a hell of a lot more than $3 million. So this was what started me thinking it. Now, a lot of people were opposed to this in the company because they were concerned about their jobs and so on and so forth. But anyway, the board went along with this, and we decided to sell it. Now, here again, I used the same philosophy that I used with everything else. It had to be honorable and above board. So I went to Morgan Stanley, and I said, we'd like to get a price on this company because we think we might sell it. 2 stipulations. We are not going to guarantee that we take whatever price you're offered. And 2, one shot. No haggling, no bullshit. So they said, fine, that's unusual, but that's fine. So they did that, and Rockwell came up with $1,650,000. Siemens was next. Emerson was $1.25 million, something like that.
$1.25 billion, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I felt that it was better for the beneficiaries, and at that point I was the chairman of the trusts. So who's my obligation to? By the beneficiaries. The major thing was that I didn't think it would be many years before they ever got the return that they'd get from investing the sale price. Well, you take Peg $400 million, you look what Jane's done.
Oh, yeah.
You know.
Wonderful.
Well, yeah, but she would never have been able to do that.
Tracy and I were invited to have dinner with the board or the trustees out at Milwaukee Country Club one night when they told us. And of course, up to that time, we had been convinced that the company couldn't be sold. But as anything, I'm not a lawyer, and although I read the trusts, I thought there's no chance, but there was a chance, and they found it. Anyway, what happened was we were not providing very good dividends. You look at the heirs, and if the company was valued back in those days at about $400 million, and if they had $400 million, their income would have been, at least $20 million on that a year. And it wasn't. It was only $1 or $2 million. So we were not. Now, the trustees had the feeling that they had plenty to live on, and I think they did, but the trustees didn't sense either that they wanted to do other things, like build the Bradley Center and do things like that, and Jane was getting older. So anyway, I got invited to breakfast one time with Joe, shouldn't have said that. Now I can't think of his last name.
Well,
he was Jane Bradley's lawyer. And he encouraged me to consider giving higher dividends. So I thought that was reasonable. His argument was very reasonable. I didn't think we could go to 5% or something like that, but we certainly could have gone 2 or 3 times what we were doing. So I went to the board and asked them if they didn't think that was a reasonable thing, and the trustees did not think it was necessary. So we didn't do it. Now, I don't know if it would have made that much difference, but anyway, it went on and on, a few months or a year, whatever it was, and the trustees were getting nervous about maybe being faced with a lawsuit for not investing the assets of the trust in something that would benefit the trustees to a greater extent. And so they made the decision to sell, and it was their decision to make.
Tiny Raider and the Board of Trustees made a decision that they would sell Allen Bradley. And I'm sure that was a really difficult decision, certainly for Tiny to make. I don't know about the others, but for Tiny to make it was, I'm sure. And there was a lot of apprehension within the company at that time. What does this mean? Why are we being sold? We're very successful. The owners didn't want us to be sold. They thought it was important to remain a privately owned corporation.
Well, as a business person and the president of the company, the decision, if it was based on if we could get the right amount of money for the company, then clearly the trust could never do any better in forever. If there's enough money paid for the company in cash, they can reinvest the money, and their earnings on that money would be higher than they would be getting from the company. So in my mind, that was a simple decision, as long as we agreed that there was a floor at which you could sell the company, or the benefit to the beneficiaries of the trust was not going to be satisfactory. So I was not concerned from that point of view. The next steps were rather interesting in that we went to the board and suggested to the board that maybe a management buyout could be arranged. That would pay a satisfactory price for it, and that would, if that was an alternative, then we were really on board. That didn't need to be the single thing we tried to do, but if that was available to us and we weren't going to be restricted from doing that, then we would give strong support to whatever needed to be done. And it didn't take very much discussion, and they agreed that we could in fact do that.
We were in kind of a interesting situation here in that we were trying to buy the company, but obviously we had to be absolutely above board in trying to sell the company, and I think we were. We held seminars with all of our top managers, going through the whole strategic plan for everyone who was actually interested enough in buying it to come here and see us.
It caused us, Bud and I, especially, and Gene Stevens to a large extent, we were running the company day by day. We were selling the company to somebody else day by day, and we were trying to buy the company ourselves day by day. Now, fortunately, those days didn't last but about 6 months, or who knows what might have happened to the operations of the company.
These investment bankers are like a leaky sieve. There's really no secrets there, you know. So the price of the company kept growing. We could feel it growing. And we had an investment banker estimate that we could probably get $1.2 billion for it before we started this thing. So we were kind of focusing on the $1.2 billion to $1.3 billion area to see what we could put together. And we had plenty of money, but the debt level was so high that I felt if we went much over $1.3 billion, we were certainly going to have to sell off some parts of the company to pay the interest of the debt. And one of the things I kept telling the people around here was my job. I was going to try to hold the company together, so I wouldn't go along with that kind of thing.
It got down to where we essentially knew it was our management buyout group called Forsman & Little, Siemens, and Rockwell were the people who were going to be the final bidders.
It got down to the last few weeks, and we had not been to Germany to see Siemens, and they were really bugging us about it. So we thought we better do that because they're obviously heavy players. And Tracy and I jumped on the Concorde one day and flew to can't remember the name of the town there, Munich.
We already knew the chairman had for years of Siemens. We knew the president in New York real well, but they wanted us to come over and just have dinner, have some meetings, and fly back the next night. We said, okay, we're really too busy, but we made this commitment to the board that we'll do whatever it takes with anybody who is interested in buying the company.
But we flew to Frankfurt and then took a car down, went through a couple Siemens plants, went to a nice hotel in Munich and met with Hans Koski and a bunch of his vice presidents. Had a nice dinner, had 2 Cavassiers after dinner, and said goodnight to everybody, and people who were locals left the hotel, and the president of Siemens USA and Tracy and I were walking back to our rooms. We walked past this little sign, and it's obviously a little nightclub in the lobby, and the guy from Siemens says, "Let's have a nightcap." And I thought, Tracy's a wonderful guy, but 2 Cavassiers is about all he ought to have. Well, I ought to have too, but anyway, we went in. We're sitting around this little table about this big around with a little candle on it, and the Siemens guy takes a napkin and writes 1.4, 1.5, 1.6, 1.7. He throws it down there and says, "What do you guys think it's going to go for? You know, this is typical." Anyway, Tracy, at that time, Tracy grabbed a pen and circled a 1.7. He says, "We're worth at least that much."
I pointed at 1.7 billion. He spit his cognac out, like so. And Bud and I broke out laughing. That's all we could do.
I was playing golf with Chuck Knight, and he said, "You know what really happened to the Siemens bid?" I said, "No, you better tell me." So he said, "Well, Kasky went to his board and asked them for 1.7 billion. And the 1.7 rang a little bell with me. So he said, well, the board, which is made up of both inside and outside people, but mainly inside, turned it down because they felt that they needed to put more money in the Singapore area, which was faster growing than the United States, and wanted to limit Kasky to what his own limit was without their approval, which was 1.5 billion. So he ended up bidding 1.5 billion, and that's how close we came to becoming a German company.
I was in Finland on a trip with Norm Thompson. The day before, the European newspapers were filled with Siemens to buy Allen Bradley, and so we thought that's what was going to happen. And they had established a time that the announcement would be made as who was going to buy it, and I had just walked out of a company in Finland. We got in the car, and I think it was Norm Thompson that said that Rockwell had bought Allen Bradley. And there were a whole lot of people in Europe that were just elated that that's how it turned out, because they would have been very much affected by what would have taken place if Siemens had been the acquirer. And as I said, in retrospect, that's one of the really good outcomes of this whole thing, was the fact that we were acquired by Rockwell.
Back then, I was kind of more of a, geez, you hate to see things like that happen, but they're going to happen. This is business. Things change. Then as I went, came back about 6 or 7 years and looked and kind of seen what would change in the growth and kind of the processes in place, I said, this is, in my opinion, and of course, this is, there may be a lot of other different opinions. I think it was one of the best things to happen to Allen Bradley, because it allowed them the financial resources to do some things they wouldn't have done. It allowed them to get to look at other management styles and other industries that we didn't have the opportunity to look at. So I really think it was very positive overall. And now it is out, now it is Rockwell, so what can you say?
But overall, it just turned out just fine. The price that was paid was very princely, the highest price that ever been paid for a private company in the history of the United States. So we felt good about that. The company that bought it, we knew it was going to be a marriage made in heaven. It turned out to be that. So there's nothing wrong with that. So I think the beneficiaries of the trust was served better than they could ever have been served. I think the customers and the employees of Allen Bradley was served just fine. And the relationship with the key people at Rockwell turned out to be very strong. So it all turned out fine.
And I think, and this is looking back now, I think if you ask yourself, was it bad for the employees? The answer is no. Was it bad for the community? The answer is no. Was it bad for the owners of the company? I'm talking about the heirs of the company. The answer is absolutely not. And so who is it bad for Rockwell? No. And so who loses in this thing? Well, I don't think anybody did. It turned out, in my mind anyway, that Rockwell was a terrific new owner. They paid a lot of money for the company. They wanted to make sure that they didn't lose some of that culture and some of the things that we've already talked about, because they thought they had something special. And you know what? They did, and they still do. Now, Rockwell has changed dramatically also since that, and here we are today back as an automation company. So Rockwell has gone through a whole series of changes as well, and I've had a lot to do with that.
Allen Bradley was acquired in 1985, and it was a very promising and profitable event for everybody, particularly the community. It allowed Jane Bradley Pettit to do a lot for this community through her funds. The Bradley Center was built. Millions of dollars were given to education. Millions of dollars were given to arts and culture. Millions of dollars were given to children's initiatives, because those are the things that Jane believed in. And so over the years, the money that came out of the sale of this company has been very good for Milwaukee and for other cities around the world and in the United States because of that. So you had Rockwell continued to play a role in the community, but then you had the Bradley Foundation, the Pettit Foundation, and now the son and daughter continue that legacy.